Okay, Chairman, we're now recording.
Lovely, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Breckland's Cabinet on Monday, the 13th of July at 9:30. And of course, this meeting is in line with the local authorities and Police and Crime Commissioner panel's coronavirus flexibility of the local authority and police and crime panel meeting, England and Wales Regulation 2020. Nice to see so many faces here today. I think we've got just over 24 councillors on the call today. And of course, we've got all my cabinet colleagues on the call as well. If any members who wish to address the meeting, if you can just place your hand up virtually or raise your hand physically so that I can see. Alternatively, if you just place a question mark in the chat function, I will get round to you in order. And I'm being assisted today by both Teresa and Julie, who will be watching the screens for anybody who wishes to address the meetings. Can I ask that members keep their cameras on if at all possible? Please ensure that you're not distracted by anything else taking place in the background. And if you could stay muted throughout. So we'll move on to item 1, which are the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 1st of June 2020, contained within pages 4 to 17. Julie, please.
Chairman, I've just been notified that Councillor Stuart Terry was missed off the attendance list.
Thank you, Julie. I remember Councillor Terry being present, so I'm happy to take that amendment. So Cabinet colleagues, are we happy that they're a true and accurate record? Super, I can see Cabinet colleagues with thumbs up. Thank you very much. Move on to item 2, apologies for absence. Teresa, I have none.
No, Chairman, no apologies.
Lovely, thank you. Item 3, urgent business. I haven't got any urgent business. Item 4, declarations of interest. These are for Cabinet members particularly, but any members who may wish to address the meeting, which are beyond what they've already declared through their declaration of interest. Any colleagues? No, I can't see any signal. No, thank you. Item 5, non-members wishing to address the meeting. Again, welcome to all those members who are joining us today. This is becoming a regular occurrence. I think Cabinet's the best show in town at the moment, so thank you very much. Item 6, Chairman's announcements. I haven't got any. So we'll move on to the start of the agenda items, which is item 7, Breckland Community Funding Application, standard item to consider any grants if there are any. Councillor Robinson, please.
Thank you, Sam. There's no community grants to come forward on this occasion.
Lovely, thank you very much. Move on to item 8, which is the Breckland Sustainability Strategy, standard item. Councillor Ian Sherwood, please.
Thank you, Leader. Before I look at local things in Breckland, I'd like to start with having a quick look at what the Chancellor announced last week. I'll be asking I have already asked our Senior Policy Advisor to look at these announcements and to consider how we can best access these and use them in Breckland. So the Chancellor announced a 2 billion Green Homes grant, as well as a 1 billion decarbonisation scheme, 400 million Green Jobs Challenge Fund, and a 500 million social housing decarbonisation fund. So that's some big announcements, and we've got the details behind those, but more will be coming. And we'll be looking at how we can best access those and use those for the residents of our communities here in Breckland. Now, if I may, Leader, I would like to look at what we've been doing in Breckland since last month. You will have seen we've announced the bee-friendly habitats policy, where we're working with our local contractors to cut the verges less where it's safe to do so. And this will encourage more diversity amongst many different kinds of bees across the area. We're also offering advice on biodiversity, and you will have seen the headline regarding the swift boxes, but it's not just about swift boxes. It's about bee boxes and bird boxes and anything that developers can do to help with the diversity in Breckland. Coming up, we've got our UEA intern starting, and he'll be looking at best practice for councils across the country. We've asked him to do that so we can see exactly what other councils are doing and how things can be shaped towards a Breckland agenda. I also met with the Woodland Trust, and this was an extremely positive meeting. We all know the Woodland Trust well and think it's all about planting trees, but it's far more than that. And one of the things I was particularly impressed with was the discussion on canopy cover. And I'm going to be looking into this with our senior policy advisor. And canopy cover looks at all the trees you have in your district, their age, the cover you've got, and that's built into a more sustainable future. So planting trees would be part of that, but caring for what you already have and valuing what you already have is just as important. Also, our senior policy advisor attended the LGA webinar with spotlight on green reset. And many of us will have heard about how the public really want green policies involved going forward post-coronavirus. And there was a lot of good information there. And again, we'll be using some of that as we go forward. Now I really want to go to the two key announcements of what's coming up and what we will be doing in Breckland. First, we're currently getting quotes to undertake a carbon audit. And this is tremendously important for the whole of the district. If we're going to make a carbon reduction, we need to understand where Breckland is now. So with the carbon audit, we'll get a better picture of understanding exactly where we stand as a council and as a district, so we can set targets that are achievable going forward. I'm also pleased to announce that we will be switching our electricity to a green energy tariff. This is one of the biggest changes we can make as a district to help with our decarbonisation, and that will start from October. We had to agree this change by the end of June, so I have authorised this to take place, and when our tariff comes up for renewal in October, we will switch to green energy. That's everything I have to say today. Chairman, I'm happy to take questions.
Lovely, thank you very much indeed, Ian. Any questions for Councillor Ian Sherwood, please? I've got Councillor Paul Hewitt and then Councillor Roger Atterwell, please.
Combination of question and statement, Chair. Following the announcement last week, we have already tasked our assets and estates team to explore where we can add to the environmental initiatives that were announced last week, on top of those already taking place within our current commercial portfolio and our council estate. And we will be working with Councillor Sherwood on anything we can do more as a district to make sure that we are as environmentally friendly as we can be. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thanks. Councillor Atterwell, please.
Thank you, Chair. This might be a question for the Cabinet Member for Planning, actually. Ties into this. I welcome what Ian has said about the nest boxes and the initiative to help the bees. In terms of planning conditions, when we give somebody planning permission, can the Cabinet Member for Planning confirm that conditions are actually monitored to ensure that developers actually do what we require of them in terms of conditions? Thank you.
Councillor Clausen, do you wish to respond?
Yes, Chairman, I'll get a written response back to Councillor Atterwell.
Okay, thank you. I've got Councillor Eagle, please.
Thank you, Leader. Just a question for Councillor Sherwood. Appreciate everything he does. As he knows, I'm nearly as an enthusiastic supporter of the environment and wildlife as he is. Since Breckland has got such a diverse area and we've got some of the rarest species in the UK, I would like it to see that in poorer cases we're pushing that every other council follows us. So I hope, as well as we're looking into other councils and seeing what they're doing, we're actually doing our own policies and coming up that we're the lead council for what's happening and pushing things. We're not frightened to actually take the lead, grasp a nettle if we want to keep on the nature element, and actually lead forward, and everyone goes, look what Breckland's doing, and not be afraid of just making the odd mistake if we're going in the right direction and we can tweak them to correct on. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Eagle. I know how passionate you are about the environment. You keep my inbox relatively busy, and they're very useful suggestions, I have to say, and you've sent some great ideas. Yeah, I'm absolutely sure Breckland will do that. When we do grasp the nettle, of course, we'll have to be careful that we don't kill any butterfly eggs while we're doing that. But yeah, I want us to strive, and it'll be for the council to decide when we have the full policy how brave we want to be. I'm keen to make sure we absolutely get it right. And that's why this important beginning stage about doing the audit, making sure we understand exactly where we are, speaking to other interested parties such as the Woodland Trust. These people are the experts. And there's more to Breckland, you're absolutely right. We've got lots of different types of environment, and we will work to make sure that they're here for future generations. Thank you, Councillor Eagle.
Thanks, Ian. I've got Councillor Morton, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I fully endorse the comments made by Councillor Eagle, and I'm pleased to see that we are getting a carbon audit underway. Measurement has got to be key, and I just look forward to that information being shared so we can see where the big carbon usage is and how we can tackle bringing that down. We need to set up a timetable. My only disappointment is, you know, it's a year virtually since we declared a climate emergency, and the first thing we'll have done is change to green electricity, which is great, but I feel we could have done it sooner, that's all.
Thank you, Councillor Morton. Again, I know how passionate you are about the green agenda, and like Councillor Eagle, you do let me have regular emails with some great ideas, which I really appreciate. I apologise for my clock in the background. I should probably get in trouble from the chairman on that. He asked us to make sure we were in a quiet environment. I'm trying to talk while it stops. There we go. So yeah, the thing with the green electricity, Councillor Morton, was we can only change on our yearly tariff at one point. That's every October, and we have to give, I think it's 3 months notice. So the first opportunity was this June. I had to make the decision by the end of June. So we've done that, and that will happen. I understand the, you know, frustration with the delays, but you're absolutely right. Once we get the audit done, we'll understand where we are. There's been lots of members of the public being in touch, and it's been really great to see that. But informed decisions and making the right decisions are key. And while the climate is an emergency, this isn't something that's happened overnight. It's something that's taken decades for us to find where we are today. And we've got decades, a few decades to sort it out. I'm not saying we mustn't act, we must, but we must get it right for the district and for the environment. So thank you for those comments.
Thanks, Ian. Any other questions or comments for Councillor Sherwood at all, as I pan across the screens? No, thanks, Ian. I know that you yourself and the policy officer are immensely frustrated at the delay. I know this isn't where you wanted to be, and I know that we made a commitment to have this as a standard item on every cabinet meeting to show how important us as the council and the cabinet felt, and we wanted to ensure that we updated colleagues and the council and the public of the work which have been undertaken. I think those initial bits you've announced so far in relation to the bee friendly scheme, the UEA intern, your work with some of the Woodland Trust, and then getting that audit underway and changing the contracts. They a blight on the face of it appear to be small, but in reality they are the foundations of that groundwork to get together that strategy to present to that working group you're ready to establish over the coming weeks and months to drive forward what will be the future for Breckland. And this is the ample right opportunity while we go through that whole council recovery, including not just our corporate plan, but also our organisational development as a council as a whole, to make sure that we can respond in a timely manner and deliver on the success and the opportunities which we face in the current climate. And as many members have said previously, we need to absolutely monopolise on this change society have and the respect people have for the environment and the community, which maybe wasn't at the forefront of their priorities before, but is now. And we need to make sure that we're striving on that moving forward. So thank you very much for that, Ian. If there are no other questions at all, oh, I can see, sorry, Councillor Clark's waving his hand very subtly across the side of the window. Just have to unmute yourself, Councillor Clark, please. Yep, there you are.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Just a very quick question. I'm happy to have that in writing from Councillor Sherwood. Very supportive of what you've announced so far in terms of the green agenda. As part of that, during COVID coronavirus crisis, there's in some areas there's been less travel, looking at pedestrianisation and so forth, and we know that pollution levels in cities and some areas have fallen as a result of less traffic. People talking about more pedestrianisation, and we know that people with respiratory conditions have been affected by pollution. Would Councillor Sherwood or other colleagues think about looking at also pollution levels while we're at it? Obviously, it's going to be kept in check a little bit by carbon reduction, etc. But just an added bonus potential for us to look at in the round. Thank you.
I can assure Councillor Clark that air quality is, an important part of the environment. I'm not sure of what you were asking me to supply you with when you said a written answer, Councillor Clark. Can you just help me with that, please?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Sherwood. Really just thinking about what we're actually doing in terms of information that we get, or how we ourselves as a council monitor air quality. Some of that will obviously be with Public Health England and the county and so forth, roadside monitoring. But in terms of where we may need to put in additional monitoring, which may require one-off or other measures of expenditure. So, for example, when you look at house purchase property, you see things property page. It says this area is this house, for example, in Swaffham, for example, I've just picked on that at a random. This house is available on the market, and the pollution levels are below the nationally agreed level, etc., or they're above, CO2 emissions. So it might be helpful, because then that's pointing the way to how far we're making a success of this. Thank you, Ian.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. I do understand now, and I'll work with my portfolio holder colleague with responsibility for the environment, and he or I will come back to you with a response to that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Lovely, thank you very much. So move on to item 9, which is the 2019-20 full year financial performance. Councillor Philip Cowan, please.
Thank you, Leader. And before we go through these particular pages on the agenda, I think it behoves of us all to thank the finance team for the work that they put in to deliver these figures. Now, you might actually say, well, it's their day job, and it is. But we must remember that in order to take us through the COVID crisis, the finance team were essentially redeployed, doing significantly different tasks throughout the period March through to the end of June. And I think in order to deliver this particular paper, they've done a remarkable job to get us where we are right now and support businesses throughout Breckland in so doing. So the paper you have before you, I'm sure you've all read it in detail, has a number of recommendations on the opening page, 5 of them, and when we get to that point, If everyone's content, we should take those on block, I believe. But there are some points that I really want to bring out. So if we look at paragraph 1.2, you will see that we are actually in an overspend position this year, £224,000 or so, having had to use some of our reserves in order to mitigate some of those extraneous costs. And you can see as you turn over the page where some of those figures have really hit home. You know, planning income and land charges down £160,000, for example. It is a significant overspend for this council. This council is in a fortunate position in that whilst it is a significant overspend, we are able to manage and mitigate that spend in a way that doesn't have a dramatic impact on our residents. If we look back at paragraph 1.4, we talked there about the NNDR, that's the Norfolk non-domestic rate pilot of just under £560,000. We have a high overspend and the outturn cost utilises this pilot income to address some of those costs, but because of the sheer scale of that particular figure, it has to go to full council for approval, as this report identifies. We do have reserves, and in total unallocated reserves total just under £7 million. But the largest of those, of course, is the general fund at £2.5 million, and that stands at a balance that we really don't want to see it drop below. So whilst we might have £7 million sitting there, £2.5 million, whilst it isn't earmarked, sits there to deal with the rate, is essentially your personal rainy day fund. You'll see from the capital on paragraph 1.5 that our outturn shows a 71% spend against budget. Clearly that means that we haven't used all the capital that we set aside in this financial year to deal with the various projects and programs we put in train last year. But there'll be a bit more of that as we go through. So if we do now turn to page 1 of 6, the appendices, the financial reports, we can see on the revenue costs that we have an actual outturn showing a £978,000 outturn, which eventually, by the time we plug that gap with some of the figures and numbers that we've been talking about throughout the report, we end up with our £224,000 overspend that we need to deal with. And more of that is on page 3. On page 2, we identify the significant variances. And you can see there when we look through development control, for example, community safety, these figures are well documented, but the biggest of those happens to be the retained business rates, which we just mentioned. And going on to page 3, you can see the total with the swings and roundabouts effectively brings us into that £224,000. On the retained business rates, page 4, that's not necessarily the total accurate picture, because there are two partner councils in Norfolk, Kings Lynn and Great Yarmouth, that have not yet finalised their figures. But Alison, who's with us today, can provide additional information, I'm sure, to answer any detailed questions about those figures. On page 5, the capital is clearly shown and the variances on the capital. So we've got £2 million, if you go back to the first page, that we want to carry forward. And of course, most of that, if not all of it, frankly, is related to projects which are ongoing and for which grant funding is available, but has not yet been spent. And they're identified there on table 2. You know, we've got Snetterton Power, which we know about. It's a reprofile of that project spend. Shipton Land, for those of us who recall, we've got a grant for Shipton, but through no fault of our own, an alternative planning application on the opposite side of the road has caused our scheme to falter for the moment. So we haven't yet drawn down that funding from government for that. And at the bottom, we've got the Thetford HIF, for instance, another large sum of money. And that money has not yet been spent, although it is clearly earmarked. If we turn to page 6, I'd like to reassure members, when you look at the counterparty exposure pie chart, where we have non-UK banks and £1 million, 4%. None of that relates to Icelandic banks. Our Icelandic bank history and legacy has essentially closed, although we are still getting interest on some of the accounts that we had. So if we go back, I think now to the first page, you will see we have 5 recommendations. Firstly, there's a note. The report and the appendix is noted, but we need to recommend to full council that the capital budgets and that 2.2 million in round figures be carried forward into the next year to support those projects we've talked about. The final capital outturn funding on Appendix B is approved, and the revised capital budget and associated funding capital programme in Appendix C be approved, and that the Norfolk non-domestic rate pilot gain is utilised to cover off the overspend. So with that in mind, Leader, I'll close, take any questions. If I can't answer them, I know Alison can. I noticed she joined us, so that's good news for me anyway. So with that, I'll close. I'll mute.
Lovely. Thank you very much indeed, Phil. Have I got any questions or comments in relation to that? Councillor Hewitt, did you have your hand up?
I did, Chair. In looking at this report in some detail, I absolutely endorse and commend the recommendation. This is a really delicate balancing act. I know, and certainly within my portfolio, that economic growth is going to allow our businesses and residents to thrive as we start to emerge out of this COVID crisis. But exactly at the same time, we also have to acknowledge that COVID has had a global impact, and we as a district council are not immune to that impact. I think the repositioning in terms of our capital allocation is prudent. I think the NNDR gain is being utilised in the right way. As Phil says, we've got reserves for rainy days. I mean, it is raining, but it's not raining hard enough to my mind to actually need to utilise some of those reserves at the moment, because the future is very, very uncertain. And so from that perspective, I think this is the right approach. We've got the right team in place. We've demonstrated once again that our prudent management of taxpayers' resources is the right approach to go. So I absolutely commend this report. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Paul. I've got Councillor Burt and Councillor Jeremy, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Couple of queries, if I may, please. On page 22, you're looking at the significant variances in expenditure, and one that my eye was drawn to was the legal services overspend. The concern I have there really is I see that there's some issues with commercial property, but I wonder how we can get at the detail of what these issues are, because I don't recall actually having any of that in the past, because there might be scrutiny issues that we might want to look at here. So how is that reported in more detail to members? And then if we go on to page 25, I'm picking back up on the capital that hasn't been spent, and it is quite concerning, because remember that this report is for last year. It goes up to the 31st of March. So the COVID-19 crisis does not apply in this case, and I'm very concerned that if we're not spending the capital which has been allocated during normal times, what is going to happen during extraordinary times that we are in now? We haven't made those capital purchases, so is that going to have a knock-on effect on our ongoing incomes into the future? Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Bird. I'll take Councillor Jeremy. If we block them together, Councillor Cowan and Alison Chubbuck, and then you can take them at block at the end. Councillor Jeremy, please.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Philip, for the report. It's very concerning, obviously, to see the level of overspend, but the lion's share is related to one topic, really, in which is housing, specifically temporary accommodation and housing benefit. I think what's more concerning is obviously this is not an area which is likely to slow down over the next 12 months. In fact, it's probably going to increase with not just sort of financial issues, but stress and increased family breakup and those sorts of issues. So I'm sure the relevant cabinet members are aware of these risks. The second paragraph in the report of section 1.3 references the new property, which is currently being refurbished, and it sort of talks about it as if it's some sort of mitigation against these increased costs. But what we do know is the capacity for that new property is going to be relatively small against the scale of the demand, and therefore I would be concerned that it would do little to reduce the costs in the future, because it just won't be able to take the numbers that we need it to be able to take. With that in mind, the obvious question is, aside from that one property, what else is the Cabinet going to be doing to address these increased housing costs in the long term, given there's such a significant amount?
Thanks, Councillor Jem. I'll ask Mr. Rob Walker, Director of Place, to come in on that at the end, please. So, Councillor Cowan.
Thank you, Leader. So, your first point, Councillor Burt, relating to legal services. Unfortunately, and I've had this conversation with my team already, legal services is not necessarily a service where they can be absolutely crystal clear with their crystal ball at the start of the year, because their services are called on as and when they're needed. And we have had some significant changes, and I'm sure Councillor Hewitt could provide you with a bit more information on some of the commercial property deals that we've had to invoke our legal services to assist with. But I, like you, am keen that we look at all of our variances, not just legal services, and understand the implications of what's happening within each department. Because when we start to put our new budget together, I'm keen that our various service managers understand precisely what they've got to do going forward, allow the right amount of cost to deal with their particular service area. And when they need to allow an element of contingency, that contingency is understood and built in as and where it can be. But as I come back to the point about legal services are very much a reactionary service, and they are providing a service to other departments in the council. The capital spend that you referred to and the carry forward on capital spend. When I took on this portfolio, I went on a fairly high level intensive local authority finance course. And one of the things I was told to look out for at the time was carry forwards, because it's a wonderful way of massaging figures for some authorities. I can absolutely assure you that that isn't the way Breckland manages its finances. A lot of the capital projects that we're talking about here are not funded directly by Breckland, they are grant funded. But more importantly, in spending grant awarded contracts, we need to make sure we've got the right contract in place. So for instance, the first item on Snetterton Power, you will know and be aware that there's been an enormous amount of work done over the last 12 months in trying to ensure we get best value for money for the development of power at Snetterton. And that's caused a slight delay, not by us, but by the partners with whom we have been trying to engage. And it's led to a change of direction, which will still deliver the power that we need, but our team are on the case. Shipdham, as I said earlier, again, we applied for and secured grant funding for that particular project. But whilst our scheme, that our developers that we work with secured planning permission, it was entirely contingent upon a scheme literally on the opposite side of the road working with us. But they decided to take a different view. So that's been held up, and consequently, we haven't been able to draw down that funding. And Thetford HIF, this is probably the largest fund that we've delivered, £14 million or so of government funding to deal with Thetford and the power issues in Thetford in particular. and it's not the easiest and simplest of projects to manage and work with. So consequently, we've had to reprofile the project spend for the HIF project, working with our partners and agencies that are supporting us. I don't believe any of our capital spend, which is being carried forward, is being carried forward because we have failed or our officers have failed in any duty that they have to the residents of Breckland. These are largely factors outside of our control. Councillor Jeremy referred to housing costs, and I would agree with the leader that Rob Walker's probably best placed to pick that up. Housing costs have escalated, and it's no secret. It's there in black and white, as Councillor Jeremy pointed out, and we are doing what we can. Colleagues are busily looking at what we can and can't do. The art of the possible is absolutely important to us. But leader, if you're happy, we could defer that to Rob Walker.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Councillor Jeremy. As the figures rightly testify, the level of demand for emergency and temporary accommodation last financial year was unprecedented, and that's reflected in the significant financial figures you see in front of you. In the latter half of that year, a significant amount of work was done to bring down the numbers of households in temporary and emergency accommodation, such that as we came to the end of the financial year, temporary and emergency accommodation use was at its lowest it had been all year. That was pre-COVID, of course, and that's put further demands on us as a local authority in terms of the number of people we need to accommodate. You'll be aware that there was a requirement for us as a local authority to accommodate all rough sleepers during the pandemic, and that was a nationwide instruction. Plus, there were more demands in terms of emergency accommodation. We also had the additional challenge that movements between registered provider properties weren't allowed during the pandemic. So the numbers have gone up again during the COVID response. This isn't a situation we're facing alone. This is a situation that every single local authority in the country is facing in responding to these levels of demand. As we're a non-stock holding authority, this means we have some challenges that some local authorities don't have, and we have to come up with creative and innovative solutions to support the housing of these people. The property you referred to at Elm Road takes, I think it's 22 people from memory. That's not a solution in its own, it's one part of the solution. So, you know, if we put all our efforts into that single property, actually wouldn't meet the completing needs and demands of the people and the clients that are presenting themselves to us on a geographic basis in terms of their particular circumstances. So please seize that as not the entire solution, but an important part of a more complicated solution. At the moment, because every single local authority in Norfolk is experiencing this issue, and actually the numbers in our counterparts are very similar to the numbers we're facing, there's a county-wide piece of work that's been done as part of the response to the COVID pandemic, looking at a housing first type model of how we might respond to emergency and temporary accommodation needs. We're actively part of that, but rather than waiting for that to come through and see that through to its finish, we've instigated work immediately with Saffron Housing and Flagship Housing to look at voids within their system and matching those voids to get against people who are in temporary and emergency accommodation. Having looked at those figures, there's clearly available accommodation that can be used to house people on our temporary list. And that's partly as a response to the lack of movements that have been happening during the pandemic. There will be a meeting this week with the registered providers to try and speed that process up and try and get as many people out of emergency accommodation as quickly as possible. Because it's there's a financial incentive for us as a local authority, but obviously there's social incentive of getting these people into sustainable and long-term housing, so they need to met properly rather than private sector hotels and B&Bs that we have to use at the moment. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Rob. I've got Councillor Atterwell, please.
Thank you, Chairman. If I could just ask Phil to look at page 2 of Appendix 1. I looked at the item 1B, development control, and it mentions in there that there were one-off costs for a lost court case. Can you tell me what the split is there? Because obviously that's just been encompassed in the figure, including the reduction in the fees that we've had. And also, could the Cabinet Member for Planning please write to me as a member of the Planning Committee with a brief summary of what that court case was? Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Atter. Could you just give me the page number just for other members on the call?
Yeah, it's page 2 of Appendix 1. The significant variances, Table 2, Item 1B.
Yep, lovely, thank you. Councillor Cowan.
Yeah, that's on page, whatever it is, I'm working from 22, I think it is. Yes, so the £72,431 is what you're referring to, I believe, Councillor Attawell. The court case costs were just about half of that, 35,000.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments in relation to that agenda item? Can't any other questions or comments? Councillor Cowan, do you wish to?
Indeed, yes, thank you, Leader. So back to page 1 of the report, we have recommendations. That we note the report, but more importantly, that we recommend to full council items 2, 3, 4 and 5, which we've talked about already. So I would move the report, Chairman.
Thank you much. Cabinet members all in agreement with the recommendations? Yep, that's everybody. Thank you very much. That's moved. Okay, so move on to item 10, which is the Innovative Project Fund Acceptance and Spend of Grant and associated match funding. Councillor Phil Cowan to present, please.
Again, thank you, Chairman. So, colleagues, this is a new fund that we are able to access. As the report identifies, we have 2 recommendations. It's a figure of £180,700 for the Innovative Projects Fund. So please bear with me. There is a list of acronyms at the back, and on the first page you'll see all the acronyms are actually stated in full. And I'm not proposing to repeat them all because some of them are quite lengthy and fulsome. However, I think it's important that we look at this particular application in the context of where we are right now. And that is that we're trying to build back stronger and better our economy in Breckland as a consequence of COVID. And this particular fund is absolutely going to do the right thing for us in order to help to position us in a place where we can deliver what we need to for the residents and businesses of Breckland. As we know, the Cambridge-Norwich Tech Corridor has been a key plank of our regeneration policy for the last few years, and Thetford and Snetterton in particular effectively sit halfway along that corridor from Cambridge to Norwich. So very important for us that we do what we can to deliver on the Tech Corridor's aspirations. This particular grant is actually to be awarded to the Tech Corridor, but the Tech Corridor isn't a legally constituted body. Breckland Council, as you can see from paragraph 1.3, is the accountable body. So when someone offers the Tech Corridor and its raison d'etre some cash, it's down to us at Breckland Council to say, yes, please, we'll have it, or no, thank you, we don't need it. And as a consequence, it's here before us today to make a decision as to whether we want to bite their hand off or tell them, I'm afraid we don't need it. You can imagine my view is quite simple. £180,000 of someone else's money for us to play with in order to deliver the outcomes that this report identifies is, frankly, in my view, a no-brainer. You will see as you turn over the page how important it is that we work with all of our businesses, entrepreneurs, and blue sky companies in Norfolk in order to drive forward our economy in a direction which will see an improvement in the standard of living of residents throughout the county, but most importantly for us here in Breckland, given the Tech Corridor runs right through our district. Paragraph 1.7, we will see, as it says, the key outputs will be a development plan in analysing the economic profile of the manufacturing and engineering sector. Back to what Councillor Sherwood was saying about our green policies, the important thing when we know when we're developing any new stream of thought is to understand where we're starting from. Until you understand the base from which you're operating, you can't actually plan for the future. So that's what one of the key outputs of this particular project will be, to clearly understand precisely how we are fixed at the moment, and as a consequence, where we can go thereafter. And most importantly, it's this point about talent sharing, where companies often employ staff not on a 100% full-time basis, but they're not seasonal workers as such, but they're brought in to deal with particular problems at a particular time where their expertise is required. And by actually sharing some of these workers across different businesses, we can actually make better advantage of the whole piece in Norfolk. So I would, without doubt, recommend to colleagues that we actually approve the acceptance, and we delegate as a recommendation to the Chief Executive and myself the authority to accept this funding and take this project forward to its next stage. Thank you, Chairman.
Thanks, Phil. I've got Councillor Hewitt, please.
Chair, in many ways, I respond to my, I just repeat my earlier comment. Economic growth will drive this district and our residents and our businesses out from the challenges we faced over the last few years. And it's very rare to see a paper that is such, as Phil suggests, such a no-brainer. I absolutely wholeheartedly endorse it. This is good for us, it's good for our district, it's good for our residents, it's good for our businesses.
Lovely, thank you very much. Any other questions or comments in relation to Councillor Mawson, please?
Thank you, Chairman. Just for my own interest, really, how far does the tech corridor extend? Does it reach Dereham, for instance?
If I may, Chairman, the tech corridor is almost a misnomer. You might call it a very large sausage. It stretches at the moment from Cambridge to Norwich, and actually dives off down to Felixstowe as well, and Ipswich. It is merely a route that's defined by one road, or two actually, the A11 and the A14. But clearly what happens with the whole notion of driving this forward is that financial institutions, higher education establishments, businesses will look at the whole hinterland and deliver exactly what it says on the tin, which is higher quality jobs throughout. And that might mean that people will move in with new businesses, but housing will be developed across the spectrum. It won't all be on the A11. It will actually dive out into the other market towns that we have. But it's something I suppose I've said many times in the past, and that is that Thetford, being the largest market town we have, and being one of the largest market towns in Norfolk, is really our economic engine for the district. It's well positioned with road and rail networks, and can only improve given some of the infrastructure that's going to be happening across the country in the coming years. But the ripple effect from Thetford is going to be felt throughout Breckland, in my view. It's not just about the A11 as a road, far from it. And businesses will feed into that and use that artery effectively, and access down to the East Coast ports as well, because that's a key area. And just looking beyond that, we're also very keen that it's actually the Oxford to Norwich corridor, which links the two principal universities at Oxford, Cambridge, and then into UEA. It's a vital piece of regional advancement. And I can't stress enough how important it is that actually it's Breckland who's the accountable body for this, because it puts us in a very strong position when we're dealing with these businesses. Thank you.
Thanks. I hope that answered your question, Philip. Absolutely, as Phil said, he referred to the CNTC as a sausage, but yeah, it's those geographical localities of Cambridge and Norwich, which has an understanding regionally, nationally and globally. Everyone knows where Cambridge and Norwich are, but they may not know where Dereham, Swaffham, Watton and Thetford are. So that's the importance of it. And as Councillor Cowan referred to, that other areas, Felixstowe, Great Yarmouth, for example, in Norfolk, is part of the CNTC. They see the importance of this type of work. And of course, they're down the end of the 47, but as a geography, as a brand, as an initiative and a program of activity to get behind, they will see the benefits from that. So absolutely, the residents of Dereham and all of our market towns and rural communities across the district will benefit from this initiative and this program and activity. I've got Councillor Robinson, please.
Thank you, Leader. I'm not going to cover the ground, eloquently put by my colleagues, Councillor Hewitt and Councillor Cowan, but I just want to highlight, yeah, I think this is a fantastic piece of work, actually. It supports, an aim for us is to deliver skilled employment opportunities for our young residents going forward. And I know for work in another arena, that is a key concern for not just the residents of Thetford, Attleborough, but also the other 5 market towns and our rural villages, where getting to work and accessing those employment opportunities is sparse. And this is just a continuation of working to support residents going forward. I think we actually see the benefits of this beyond our own lifetimes, actually. So I'm fully aligned with this, and I think it's a cracking piece of work we should support.
Lovely, thank you, Councillor Robinson. Any other questions or comments? No, so just for the purpose of the agenda report, due to the sums of money, this will be a recommendation to Council, Councillor Cowan. So obviously we may need to amend it's for that purpose, but I'm happy to take that recommendation if you wish to propose, Councillor Cowan.
I would indeed. I would like us as a cabinet to endorse the report and recommend to Council that we approve acceptance of the spend. So the amended wording on paragraph 1 will be to recommend to Council that we approve acceptance and spending of the Innovative Projects Fund.
Thank you very much. Cabinet members, are we all in agreement with? Super, thank you. That's great. So thank you very much for everyone's time today. A really good meeting. We went through item 8, which was the sustainability update, and great to hear that we've got the intern from the UEA, the meetings which we'll undertake with the cabinet member in relation to the Woodland Trust, and getting away and starting our carbon audit, and of course our changing for the green energy for the council by October. Thank you for the full year financial report under item 9 and the recommendation to cabinet and to council. There's some work we've got to undertake, obviously that overspend, but of course is in relation to Councillor Jeremy's question, some of that overspend related to housing, and we are working hard across not just Breckland but across Norfolk to find some real long-term solutions, not some quick gimmicks, to ensure that those residents across the district and those who may need to move into the district are protected and are given a home for the future moving forward as well. And of course, item 10, the Innovative Project Fund. This is Breckland showing its commitment to that partnership under CNTC, which will not benefit just Breckland, but the wider Norfolk and Suffolk economy. And as Councillor Hewitt quite rightly said, we've got to drive that economy forward to protect both residents and businesses alike. So a really good meeting today. The next item is obviously item 11. The next meeting for the Cabinet will be held on Monday, the 7th of September, 2020. Everybody, thank you ever so much for your time today. Stay safe.